I was in disbelief when I took my father-in-law out to dinner and, as I walked through the glass door of that cozy restaurant, my eyes froze on a scene I never imagined I would witness, my wife smiling broadly as she touched the hand of another man, the same man I knew to be her boss, leaning forward as if his words were sweeter than the red wine in their glasses. Time stopped, and the hubbub around me turned into a deafening silence. I remember feeling the blood heat every cell in my body, my heart thundering so loudly that I thought everyone could hear it. I loved her more than my own life. I had plans to surprise her with something I had been organizing for months. I saved every penny. I put aside my own dreams to give her a new home, a place where I imagined we would build a new phase, where we would celebrate birthdays, laugh until we cried and watch our children grow up, but at that moment, I realized that everything I had planned was nothing more than a foolish dream. I couldn't wait to understand or think of any excuse I could invent to justify such blatant betrayal. I just stood up with an almost cruel calm, walked to their table feeling every glance in the room turn to me like sharp knives and, with the firmest voice I could find, I declared in so many words that I was disappointed, that I could no longer continue married to someone who had stabbed me in the back like that and that the divorce would only be a matter of days. She didn't say anything, she didn't look away, she just kept that empty smile, as if she didn't care about the words that tore at my chest and ran down my throat like acid. The boss just adjusted his jacket, looked at me as if I were invisible, and continued the conversation as if I had never existed. When I walked away, my mind was spinning, my vision blurred with pain and anger, and all I could think about was how I had been blind for so long, how I could have missed such obvious signs, how I had trusted so much in someone who, deep down, never deserved my love. The nights we had spent together, the promises whispered in the darkness, the kisses that seemed eternal, all of it turned to dust the moment I saw them together, laughing at a world I didn't know, as if their souls were secretly intertwined. In the days that followed, the house that was once full of life became a tomb, with echoes of memories and silences that screamed louder than any argument. I saw her passing through the rooms like a ghost, avoiding my eyes, but without even trying to apologize or explain what she had done. With each dawn, my heart grew colder, while the image of her, once so radiant, turned into a blur of regret and repulsion. At a certain point, I thought about giving her a chance, about talking, about understanding where I had gone wrong, but then I discovered that, even after everything, she was still in contact with him, exchanging messages that I read in secret, messages that made me burn with a mixture of humiliation and disbelief, like when she wrote, "Don't call him, everything will work out." Then the unthinkable happened. He fired her, cut off every bond that united them, threw her away like a broken toy, leaving her stunned and empty, like a child lost in a fire. She sought him out, tried to convince him that she deserved more than just a few nights in cheap hotels, but for him it was nothing more than entertainment, a passing distraction that had already become inconvenient. When she realized that she had lost me and that all that was left was the echo of her own choices, she became desperate, knocked on my door with red eyes, her face pale, begging for one more chance, begging me to take her back and promising that she would never make me suffer again. But at that moment, something inside me had already changed irreversibly. I was determined to move on, to rebuild my pride, to find someone who would truly love me without secrets, without lies. The pain still throbbed with every breath, but there was also a strange relief, as if liberation had finally found me. What she never knew, and what no one could have imagined, is that while she was losing herself in games of seduction and lies, I was keeping with me the greatest surprise any man in love could prepare, the key to a new house, paid for with years of sacrifice, designed to be the beginning of our love again. I intended to give it to her at that dinner, in front of my father-in-law, as proof that I wanted to build a future with her, but instead, I found the ruins of what we were. What keeps me awake at night to this day is not just the betrayal itself, but the question that haunts me: if I had arrived a few minutes later, if I hadn't taken my father-in-law that day, would I still be living a comfortable lie, loving someone who never really belonged to me? What would have become of my life if I hadn't witnessed that scene? Sometimes I catch myself imagining what our story would have been like if everything had worked out, but then I remember the messages, the hands intertwined with another man, and I realize that perhaps fate was more kind than cruel, allowing me to see who she really was before it was too late. But what happened after she was rejected by everyone she loved? Did she find a way to get back on her feet, or did she sink even deeper into the consequences of her choices? And as for me, was I able to rebuild my shattered heart, or did the fear of betrayal forever prevent me from loving again? Welcome to our channel. We never support any form of cheating here. Our stories are completely fictional and exist only to show how infidelity destroys lives, hearts, and families. Get ready for an intense, emotional, and shocking narrative. Sit back, take a deep breath, and enjoy the story. There they were, living what many would believe to be the perfect portrait of a happy couple, with laughter echoing through the hallways of the spacious, modern apartment they had shared for almost 5 years. His name was Lucas, a 36-year-old man who had achieved stability as a financial manager at an investment firm. He had a steady gaze, an easy smile, and a calm demeanor that calmed even the most tense moments. He was proud of having built everything with his own effort, from his first car to his apartment, and of being known among friends and family as someone trustworthy, kind, and who would never raise his voice to those he loved. She was Helena, 2 years younger, with a charming personality that drew attention as soon as she arrived anywhere. Her brown eyes shone with a captivating intensity, and her melodious laugh was capable of transforming a boring meeting into something light and fun. Helena worked as an administrative assistant at a large brokerage firm, where her proactive manner and charisma made her stand out. Always dressed with understated elegance, she exuded the confidence of someone who knew she was admired, but maintained an aura of sweetness that made everyone believe in her purity. Their relationship began as one of those meetings that seemed destined. A mutual friend introduced them at a happy hour on a Friday, and from the first smile they exchanged, it seemed like the universe was conspiring to bring them together. Helena clearly remembered the way Lucas held her hand for the first time, the softness of his touch that conveyed security and affection. He, in turn, remembered the perfume she was wearing that night and how his heart skipped a beat when he saw her laugh at a lame joke he had made up just to have something to talk about. Within a few months, there was no longer any doubt for either of them that this was true love. Their relationship progressed quickly, but not irresponsibly. They moved in together after 2 years, testing each other's routines, flaws and quirks. Together, they learned to respect each other's space, to negotiate small differences and to celebrate each achievement, like their first international trip or the purchase of the new sofa they chose on a rainy Saturday. Their apartment reflected exactly the combination of their tastes: books organized on minimalist shelves that belonged to Lucas, while abstract paintings in shades of blue and green chosen by Helena decorated the walls. The kitchen was the heart of the home, where Helena tried out recipes that she learned from videos on the internet, and Lucas loved to surprise her with improvised breakfasts, always decorated with strawberries cut into the shape of hearts. Friends who visited them never tired of commenting on how welcoming the environment was, full of details that revealed complicity, such as love notes stuck to the fridge or small gifts exchanged on random dates. Even the fights, when they happened, ended in long conversations on the couch, accompanied by hugs that made it seem as if nothing in the world could separate them. Lucas' father-in-law, Helena's father, was also a frequent figure in the couple's life. His name was Renato, a 62-year-old widower with a strong personality and much loved by the family. He had a special affection for Lucas, whom he considered a true son, and never missed an opportunity to praise him at Sunday lunches, proud to see his daughter married to such a dedicated man. Renato was the kind of man who liked to tell stories about his youth, laugh out loud and joke about how marriage was a daily learning experience. Helena always had fun with her father's jokes, while Lucas made a point of showing respect and gratitude to the man who had entrusted him with the most important person in his life. Helena and Lucas's routine was a picture of organization. They woke up together at 6:30, had coffee while talking about their plans for the day, and left for work at almost the same time, exchanging quick kisses and promises to talk to each other throughout the day. At night, they shared household chores, laughed together about everyday situations at the office, and shared dreams that ranged from having children to traveling to exotic places like Japan or Iceland. On Saturdays, it was their tradition to have breakfast at a charming bakery in the neighborhood, where they always sat at the same table near the window and made plans for the future, discussing everything from renovations they wanted to do in the apartment to names they would choose for children they were not yet sure about having. But despite the seemingly perfect setting, there were details that few noticed. like the way Helena sometimes seemed restless, looking at her cell phone with a strange glow in her eyes, or how Lucas sometimes seemed distant, immersed in thoughts that he didn't share even with his closest friends. These moments were subtle, almost invisible, but present, like tiny cracks in a seemingly solid wall. Still, the love that the two demonstrated in public was so captivating that no one imagined that something could be wrong, much less that there was any shadow hanging over their union. Weekends were marked by visits to shopping malls, movie nights, walks in parks or short trips to nearby cities, where they took the opportunity to relax, try new restaurants and take photos that they later made sure to post on social media with loving captions. Everyone commented on the photos praising the perfect couple, saying they were overflowing with happiness, while they, smiling for the cameras, seemed to confirm every word. Helena loved organizing small dinners for friends, setting tables decorated with fresh flowers, while Lucas took care of the background music and drinks, always attentive to making sure everyone was comfortable. On those nights, guests would leave commenting on how the two seemed made for each other, how their harmony was inspiring. At work, Helena was known for her enthusiasm for Lucas. Colleagues would enjoy the stories she would tell, such as the time he was late for a meeting because he had to wait to choose the perfect shirt, or how he surprised her on her birthday with a candlelit dinner at home. Lucas, on the other hand, would always praise his wife whenever he had the chance, saying that she was the sweetest and most dedicated person he knew, and he was proud to be able to share his life with her. He would bring Helena as his date to company parties, and everyone would comment on what an elegant and passionate couple they made. For many, the two became the ideal relationship, a symbol of partnership, respect and love. Helena also had professional ambitions. In recent months, she had talked more and more about moving up within the brokerage firm, achieving higher positions, and showing that she was capable of going far. Lucas supported her every idea, encouraging her to study and excel, even offering to take care of household chores when she had to stay late at work or take training courses. This mutual dedication meant that each small success was celebrated as a victory for the couple. When Helena received an unexpected bonus, they organized a special dinner to celebrate. When Lucas was promoted, Helena filled the apartment with balloons and left a loving note on his bedside table. Helena's proud father saw his son-in-law not only as a companion for his daughter, but also as a friend with whom he could talk about anything. During Sunday lunches, they would spend hours discussing football, politics, and old movies, while Helena took the opportunity to rest or catch up with friends. These weekly meetings strengthened the bonds between them and made Lucas feel even more part of the family, as if he was connected to Helena not only by love, but by a whole bond of history, respect, and affection. From the outside, it was impossible to see any cracks. Their social life was active, with trips planned in advance, reservations at romantic hotels and constant participation in social events. Helena liked to organize everything, from the itinerary to the clothes they would wear, while Lucas just smiled and followed her, happy to see her excited. When they arrived at their destinations, they didn't hold back on photos and declarations, collecting memories that seemed to further strengthen their image as a loving couple. When they returned home, they organized their memories in albums that they kept like treasures on a special shelf in their room. The nights were mostly filled with complicity, series watched side by side, glasses of wine shared while discussing theories about the ending of episodes, quiet laughter amid kisses that still seemed to have the same intensity as their first encounters. There were, yes, days of tiredness, days when they arrived home exhausted and barely exchanged words, but even then, they slept hand in hand, as if one were the other's anchor in the midst of the storms of the world outside. Their love seemed so unshakable that no one could suspect that, at some point, it could all fall apart. Inside the apartment, Helena liked to prepare little details that made Lucas feel special, post-its with sweet messages spread around the house, playlists created exclusively for him, perfumes chosen for special nights. Lucas, in turn, had the habit of writing letters on special dates, words that Helena read with teary eyes, moved by his sensitivity. They had songs that they considered ours, movies that they watched every year on their anniversary, and unique traditions, such as walking hand in hand in the neighborhood square every last Sunday of the month. At first glance, it seemed like there was no room for secrets between them, as Helena shared with Lucas every detail of her work routine, and Lucas told her about his daily challenges and achievements. Their conversations flowed naturally, filled with plans for the future. They talked about adopting a dog, changing cars, planning to have children in a few years. These dreams seemed solid, supported by the respect and intimacy they had built over time. There was no indication that, behind their smiles, something could be about to jeopardize everything they had built. The days began to get shorter and the temperature began to drop gently, bringing that early autumn climate that Helena always said she loved. She commented on how the yellow leaves made the streets more beautiful, while Lucas just smiled and listened to her patiently, enchanted by the way she saw beauty in the simplest details. Their routines remained apparently normal. She left the house dressed up, smelling of perfume, saying goodbye with long kisses, and he walked her to the door with words of encouragement for the day that awaited her. Still, small signs began to appear, almost imperceptible to those who weren't paying attention, but which, when added together, created an inconvenience that was hard to ignore. Like the fact that Helena would sometimes arrive home later than she usually said, explaining that the traffic was worse than ever, or showing up with excuses for meetings that had unexpectedly dragged on. Lucas tried to push away any bad thoughts, but something inside him began to awaken, a premonition that settled like a gray cloud over his chest, suffocating him in moments of silence. He began to notice that, during their nighttime conversations, Helena seemed distracted, smiling mechanically, answering questions with short sentences, looking away whenever he tried to look at her for more than a few seconds. The spontaneous laughter had diminished, replaced by forced smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Still, he clung to the memories of the love they shared, to the vows they exchanged so many times in the early hours of the morning filled with confidences and dreams. But as the days went by, the feeling of disconnection only grew, as if an invisible wall had been erected between them, preventing the warmth of one from reaching the other. Her messages during the day also changed in tone. Before, she would send photos, phrases of longing and tell him every detail of what she was doing. Now, her responses were increasingly monosyllabic, spaced out and often justified with, "I'm busy." One Saturday, while they were organizing a coffee party for his father-in-law, Lucas watched Helena prepare the table with excessive care, but he noticed that her hands were shaking slightly as she arranged the cutlery. When he questioned her, he received a quick and evasive smile. During the coffee, she seemed even more distant, participating in the conversations only with nods and short laughs. His father-in-law, always perceptive, even asked if everything was okay, but Helena skillfully changed the subject, talking about a cake she wanted to learn how to make. Lucas tried to convince himself that it was just accumulated fatigue. After all, she had been working a lot in the last few weeks, but deep down, a nagging voice insisted that something was wrong. He began to feel afraid of finding out the truth, so he preferred to ignore the small pieces of evidence that accumulated like shards of glass ready to hurt him. The following week, Helena announced that she would have to work late because of an important project. She said she couldn't have dinner at home and asked Lucas not to wait for her. He pretended to be casual, but after she left, he went to the kitchen, opened a bottle of wine and sat on the couch in absolute silence, feeling the weight of each minute that passed. The house, once alive with her sounds, now seemed like a strange, cold and distant place. He stared at the door waiting for her to appear, even though he knew she wouldn't show up anytime soon. When he finally decided to call to see if she was okay, the call went straight to voicemail. He sent a message, which also went unanswered. Dawn arrived and he ended up falling asleep on the couch, waking up only with the sun invading the living room, his eyes burning with anxiety and his chest suffocated by the fear of something he couldn't explain. In the following days, the excuses for the odd hours became more and more frequent. Helena said she had to travel to meetings in another city, that she had corporate dinners, that she needed to be available for last-minute conferences. Lucas tried to remain calm, but insecurity ate away at his heart with each prolonged absence, each time a cell phone rang that wasn't meant for him, each time he smelled her perfume more intensely than usual, as if she had just gotten ready for someone other than him. The flame of distrust, previously just an annoyance, grew like a fire in a dry forest, consuming the little peace that remained. One of those days, a mutual friend called Lucas to say that he had seen him alone at a restaurant they often frequented, and asked why they weren't together. Lucas replied, with a shaky voice, that Helena was in a meeting. But as soon as he hung up, the thought that something was very wrong swallowed him whole. He decided then that he needed answers. He decided that he would accompany her without her knowing, seeking the truth that he feared but could no longer avoid. On Friday, when Helena said she would work late again, he waited a few minutes after she left, got in the car and drove away, keeping enough distance to not be noticed. His hands were sweating on the steering wheel, his breathing was uneven, and his heart was racing as if it would explode at any moment. The journey seemed endless, each traffic light took ages to change, each car ahead turned into an annoying obstacle. When she parked in front of a restaurant that wasn't close to the brokerage, he hid, watching as she got out of the car and fixed her hair with excessive care, taking a deep breath before entering. With each step she took, Lucas felt the world spin in slow motion, as if fate wanted to torture him with the slowness of movements that would confirm his worst fears. He left the car parked a few meters behind and approached on foot, until he found a position where he could see through the glass windows of the illuminated room. His stomach turned when he saw her sitting at the table, smiling like she hadn't smiled at him in a long time, playing with her hair like she did when she wanted to impress, throwing her neck back in a laugh that seemed too exaggerated to be genuine. Beside her, a man wearing a dark suit, with a confident expression and gestures that made it clear he felt in control of the situation, was looking at her intensely. Between glasses of wine and elaborate dishes, the two exchanged knowing looks, subtle touches of hands, words that only they could hear and that seemed to cause shivers of pleasure. Each smile of hers was a silent stab in Lucas, who felt small, fragile and powerless in the face of the scene. He tried to rationalize, telling himself that it could just be a business dinner, but the intimacy that overflowed between them made it clear that it was not about anything professional. Time lost all meaning as he watched, feeling his entire body tremble and his legs threatening to give way at any moment. For a moment, he thought about simply leaving, pretending he hadn't seen anything, trying to save what was left, but something inside him pushed him forward, an uncontrollable impulse that took over his body. He entered the restaurant, walking with heavy steps that seemed to echo in his mind, ignoring the curious looks he felt on him. Each step was like walking towards an abyss, but he couldn't stop anymore. When he reached their table, he stood for a few seconds that seemed like hours, staring at Helena who, upon recognizing him, froze with her eyes wide open and her smile slowly fading into an expression of contained panic. The man next to her just arched an eyebrow, staring at Lucas defiantly, as if he had nothing to fear. Lucas's voice was low but firm, filled with a pain so deep that it reverberated in every syllable. He said he was disappointed, that he never imagined he would have to see with his own eyes what was now before him like a nightmare come true. Helena tried to stammer something, but her voice failed her, and all she could do was lower her head, as if she had finally understood the gravity of what was happening. The silence that fell around the table was deafening, and each breath felt like thunder. When Lucas turned his back, he felt his chest burn as if it were being torn apart, but also a strange feeling of relief for no longer having to live with the doubt that gnawed at him day after day. He left the restaurant without looking back, leaving behind not only the woman he loved, but also all the dreams they had built together. And as he walked away, a question began to form in his mind, a doubt that could only be answered at the right time: what was the real reason behind such a cruel betrayal? The silence that dominated the days following the confrontation in the restaurant was so suffocating that it seemed to fill every room in the apartment that had previously been a home filled with laughter and plans. Lucas sank into his thoughts as the clocks ticked slowly and cruelly, reminding him with each chime that life as he knew it was over. There were no more good morning messages, no kisses on the way out or hugs when he returned from work. Helena had completely disappeared after that night, leaving only the clothes still hanging in the closet and the scent of the perfume that permeated the pillow next to his, reminding him with every breath of the betrayal that had destroyed his heart. He felt like a stranger in his own home, wandering around the rooms as if searching for clues that could explain how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Meanwhile, the pain mixed with anger, and the longing became a poison that he fought daily to keep from spilling over into the tears that insisted on falling. It was on a Friday afternoon, when the sun was beginning to set and dye the sky orange, that the doorbell rang insistently. Lucas opened the door and found Helena standing there, thin, haggard, her eyes swollen from crying so much, and the posture of someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She asked to come in with a choked voice, and he, after a few seconds of hesitation, made room for her to pass. The air seemed thick as they walked to the living room. She sat on the edge of the sofa as if she didn't have the strength to sit properly, and he stood there, arms crossed, trying to keep control over the emotions that threatened to overflow at the slightest misplaced word. Helena began by saying that she knew she no longer had the right to ask for anything, but that she needed to tell him something she could no longer carry alone, something that explained what had led her to approach her boss and that made everything even more painful. Lucas snorted, rolled his eyes impatiently, but motioned for her to continue, determined to hear it through, no matter how much it hurt. Her voice trembled as she revealed that, months before everything fell apart, when she noticed that their relationship seemed to be falling into a routine, she began to feel insecure, afraid that Lucas was getting tired of her. She began to think that, if he no longer loved her as before, she needed to find a way to make him look at her again with the same sparkle in his eyes that she saw in the beginning. That was when she found files on his computer that showed a grand plan. Lucas was saving money and quietly negotiating the purchase of a new house, a spacious 2-story house in a better neighborhood, to surprise her with the home of their dreams. He wanted to renew their commitment, to give her the life he had always promised, but Helena, overcome by insecurity, interpreted that as a sign that he planned to leave, that he intended to use the property as a way out of a possible breakup. Helena's words came out quickly, full of despair, and tears streamed down her face as she confessed that, overcome by this paranoia, she sought comfort in someone who made her feel immediately desired, someone who would give her instant attention, as if that could cover up the fear that was eating away at her. Helena said that when she received the first compliment from her boss about her appearance, she felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in months, and she allowed that to evolve into increasingly intimate encounters. But what tore Lucas apart the most was hearing, amidst sobs, that during all this time she had ignored the proofs of love he had been leaving along the way, the fancy breakfasts, the loving notes and, most importantly, the project he had created to change their lives for the better. Helena confessed that she only understood everything when, days after the confrontation, she contacted the real estate agency and discovered that the property Lucas was negotiating was in his name and that the financing was in the final stages. Only then did he realize that, instead of wanting to leave her, he dreamed of giving her the greatest gesture of love he could make. Helena's voice broke as she asked why he hadn't told her about the project before, why he hadn't told her what he planned, while Lucas burst into a restrained scream, saying that he wanted to surprise her, that he had planned everything so carefully because he wanted to see the happiness on her face, that it had never crossed his mind to abandon her, but rather to build something even greater by her side. The apartment was filled with a brutal energy, as if the walls were witnesses to an emotional earthquake, and the two stared at each other like strangers who had once loved each other deeply but now could no longer recognize each other. Helena stood up in a rush, walking towards him with trembling hands, trying to hold him, but Lucas stepped back, his eyes brimming with hurt, saying that there was no going back, that her choices had destroyed any chance of rebuilding. The conversation turned into a whirlwind of words spoken in increasingly loud tones, interrupted by sobs and moments of desperate silence, where only their panting breaths filled the space. Helena begged him to understand that it was all the result of an irrational fear, that she loved him more than anything and that she was willing to make any sacrifice to prove it. Lucas, on the other hand, shook his head, repeating that he no longer knew who she was, that he could no longer trust every word that came out of her mouth, that the betrayal was not just physical, but an abyss that swallowed up all the certainties he had about what they had built together. When Helena fell to her knees before him, her hands gripping the hem of his shirt as if it were the only thing keeping her upright, Lucas felt his heart break again, but instead of giving in, he slowly walked away, leaving her kneeling, completely devastated. Through her tears, she revealed that she had tried several times to undo the affair before she was discovered, but that each attempt failed because her boss always convinced her to stay, and that now, after being discarded by him, all that was left was the shame and regret that burned her soul every day. She also said that she realized, too late, that she had everything she had ever dreamed of and that she had thrown it away because she did not know how to trust the love she received. The silence that followed was so heavy that it seemed to distort time. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to find the strength not to break down right there, while Helena sobbed with her head down, aware that there were no words enough to mend the destruction caused by her choices. It was then that he, with a firm but pain-filled voice, said that there was no way to erase what had been done, that the love he felt for her had become something unrecognizable, and that he needed to think about himself, because if he continued in that cycle, only destruction would remain. Helena tried to get up, but her legs gave out, and Lucas approached her only to help her stand, supporting her for a few seconds before letting her go as if he were giving away something he never wanted to hold again. She staggered out, holding on to the walls of the hallway, while Lucas remained standing, listening to her footsteps move away and, with them, the certainty that the story they had started together had ended there. When the door closed, he fell to his knees, his breath ragged, but at the same time feeling that, for the first time in a long time, he could start thinking about himself. Still, the question that echoed in his mind, like an endless thunder, was why her fear spoke louder than the love they had built, and if he would ever be able to love again without carrying the fear of being betrayed again. The end of that night marked such a definitive breaking point that, in the following days, Lucas seemed to be walking in a parallel reality, where everything around him continued to move normally, but he felt like someone watching his own life from behind thick, foggy glass. People smiled on the streets, his co-workers chatted about trivial matters, and even the sound of the birds in the morning seemed to mock the emptiness that had settled in his chest. He had decided not to leave the apartment over the weekend, preferring to lock himself in the house to try to understand how he could rearrange the pieces of an existence that had shattered into 1,000 fragments. Loneliness became an uncomfortable but necessary companion, because every object around him carried memories of Helena, as if everything conspired to remind him that, no matter how much he wanted to, he could not simply erase the years of complicity they had shared. Her mug in the cupboard, her forgotten toothbrush in the bathroom, her still-smelling clothes in the wardrobe, every detail seemed to whisper secrets he no longer wanted to hear. However, it was on a Monday morning, when Lucas woke up determined to resume his routine and not allow the pain to keep him prisoner, that fate unexpectedly made itself present again. The doorman of the building called to say that Helena was at the reception and insisted on coming up. He took a deep breath, feeling anxiety tug at his stomach, and authorized entry. When the door opened, she appeared with puffy eyes, but there was a flame of determination in her gaze that he had not yet recognized. Helena asked for just a few minutes to speak, but Lucas, cautious, agreed with a nod, letting her in. The apartment seemed smaller than ever with the two of them inside, as if the air between them had become too heavy to breathe without effort. She began to speak differently, without the hesitation that had characterized her so much before, saying that she had spent the last few days talking to her father, who welcomed her with open arms, but looked at her with the same disappointment that Lucas had in his eyes. She said that she had realized that she had no one else but him and that her greatest fear, ironically, had come true, losing the only person who had made her feel safe and truly loved. Helena confessed that she had sought out her boss to try to convince him to resume their relationship, but when she was rejected in a cold and humiliating way, she fell into an abyss of regret from which she could not escape. Each of her words echoed like a belated lament, and Lucas just watched her in silence, fighting against the compassion that insisted on resurfacing, but that he knew he could no longer allow to guide his decisions. The conversation became more intense when she approached him with tears streaming down her face, asking for a chance to show him that things could be different, that she was willing to start all over again. Lucas, taking a deep breath, replied in a deep, firm voice that he could not erase the pain he felt, and that even if there was still love, respect had been irreparably destroyed. "How will I trust again?" he asked with teary eyes, as she tried to hold his hands that, hesitantly, withdrew as if they were afraid of getting burned. The sound of their voices filled the room, alternating between pleas and denials, between memories of what they had lived and memories of what they had lost, as if they were trying to sew something that no longer had fabric to support the stitches. In the middle of the conversation, Helena revealed something that she had not had the courage to confess until then. She said that, on one of the nights when he was sleeping soundly, she went through his emails and found the deal for the house, but instead of asking or feeling excited, she was overcome by an irrational panic that made her distance herself even further. Lucas's pain exploded in cutting words when he said that he could never have imagined that the love he felt for her, so pure, could be transformed into a reason for fear. Helena burst into tears, kneeling on the floor, begging him between sobs to understand that it was not a lack of love, but insecurity, that she had always felt small in the face of his care and thought she did not deserve such dedication. The intensity of the moment seemed to distort time, as if everything were happening in slow motion, while each sentence hurt like a blade. Lucas, with a heavy gaze, sat on the sofa and ran his hands over his face, shaking his head, unsure if what hurt most was the betrayal or the realization that all the suffering could have been avoided if Helena had trusted him, if she had talked about her insecurities instead of seeking the validation she already had at home in other arms. Anger and sadness mixed together, turning each breath into an effort. Silence fell between them again, but it was no longer the suffocating silence of the first night, but rather a silence of exhaustion, as if they had both used up the last reserves of energy they had left. Changing the scene, Helena stood up and suggested they talk somewhere else, suggesting they go to the house Lucas was negotiating, which was already ready to welcome the couple he dreamed of building there. He hesitated, but ended up giving in, as if he wanted to show her what they could have had together. On the way, the atmosphere inside the car was one of absolute suspense, the sound of the engine drowning out the beating of their racing hearts. When they arrived, the sight of the imposing mansion, with its newly planted garden and impeccable facade, left Helena speechless. Lucas opened the door and led her through the rooms decorated with new furniture, chosen in secret to surprise her, each space designed to make her feel at home and happy. The couple's bedroom had soft colors, elegant curtains, a large bed with sheets still wrapped, and a balcony that overlooked a side garden that he planned to fill with flowers that she said she loved. As they walked through the rooms, Helena fell apart more with each step, touching the furniture with her fingertips as if she were touching a dream she had lost forever. "You did all this for me, and she stammered between sobs, unable to finish the sentence. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, breathing deeply, fighting the urge to hug her and erase all the pain. But he knew he couldn't. "I did it because I loved you, because I wanted you to feel safe, because I believed that we were both stronger than any difficulty," she replied with a choked voice. The sound echoed through the empty walls of the house, as if the room itself understood the weight of those words. The conversation continued to be filled with emotion. Helena said she was willing to give up everything to rebuild trust, but Lucas, with a distant look in his eyes, explained that what hurt the most was realizing that there had been no lack of love, but rather of dialogue, that they had everything they needed to make it work, but had lost their courage to express their fears and insecurities. He said that, in the last few days, he had started to think that he might never be able to love someone with the same intensity again, that the fear of being deceived again would follow him like a shadow. Helena, without strength, sat on the floor of the living room, hugging her knees while shaking her head in denial, crying softly, as if she understood that it was over. When he ran out of words, Lucas helped her up and walked her to the door, but before she left, he held her hand for a brief moment and said that he hoped that one day she would find peace with herself, because he had understood that love was not enough if it was not accompanied by trust and truth. Helena looked at him one last time, and in her eyes there was a sea of good and bad memories, but also the certainty that this was the final goodbye. As she walked to the car, the wind gently swayed the plants in the garden, as if even nature mourned the end of what could have been. Lucas stood there for a few minutes, looking at the house he had dreamed of for the two of them, feeling his heart bleed, but also relieved that he had exposed the whole truth and finally ended the cycle. He knew he had to move on, but he carried within him the awareness that the greatest wound was not the betrayal itself, but the destruction of a future he had built in silence, every detail thought out with love. He returned to the car, closed the door carefully and, before driving off, looked in the rearview mirror one last time, as if saying goodbye to a chapter that could never be rewritten, but that, in some way, also marked who he was and who he could still become. As Helena's car disappeared around the bend in the street, the silence that settled in was so absolute that Lucas could hear the muffled sound of his own heart, as if its beating echoed in the emptiness of the newly purchased house that now seemed like a monument to the hopes he had built alone. He remained in the driver's seat for long minutes, his trembling hand still resting on the steering wheel, without the strength to turn the key. The smell of the car mixed with her perfume, impregnated in every inch of the upholstery, like a cruel reminder of what had happened. When he finally managed to move, he walked through the house again, each room witnessing the fall of what he had once believed to be unshakable. The living room, designed for movie nights and unhurried conversations, now seemed cold and lifeless. The bedroom, planned to be their refuge, was immaculate, but so far from any sense of home that it almost hurt. In every detail, he saw not only the love he felt, but also the naivety that led him to believe that loving deeply was enough to keep someone by his side. In the days that followed, Lucas returned to the apartment he shared with Helena, as he needed to organize the move and make decisions about how he would proceed from there. The atmosphere felt heavier than ever, as if the air was permeated with memories that refused to dissipate. Opening the closet and seeing her clothes still hanging, smelling her perfume in every corner, finding the little forgotten things, a clip on the dresser, a book marked halfway through, shoes next to the bed, all of this kept him trapped in a cycle of memories and regrets. The biggest dilemma that haunted him was no longer the pain of having been betrayed, but the uncertainty of how to rebuild his life without allowing fear to become a permanent part of who he was. He questioned whether he would ever be able to give his heart again, whether he would ever trust someone again enough to bear himself emotionally without fear of being torn apart. In this scenario, an unexpected invitation forced him out of the stupor he was in. A couple of friends invited him to dinner at a restaurant they used to frequent together. After hesitating, he accepted, believing that he needed to resume his social life before loneliness swallowed him completely. During the meeting, between glasses of wine and conversations about trivialities, Lucas realized how out of place he still felt. The sound of laughter, the background music and even the decoration of the place brought back flashes of what his life with Helena had been like, as if everything around him was a reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. Still, when one of his friends lightly touched his arm and told him that he was not alone, that everyone was there to help him get back on his feet, Lucas felt a spark of hope for the first time. That night, lying in bed, Lucas reflected on how the people around him offered support, but no words could penetrate the barrier he had built to protect what was left of his heart. The open wound of betrayal was not just a matter of wounded pride, but a profound shock to his worldview. He wondered if he could forgive not only Helena, but himself, for having given so much of himself to someone who, deep down, was not ready to receive such love. The following nights were long and silent, with hours spent staring at the dark ceiling of the room, searching for answers to questions that echoed like ghosts. Where did everything start to go wrong? What could he have done differently? And, above all, who would he be after all this? At work, the changes began to make themselves felt. His colleagues, who had initially avoided discussing the subject out of respect, began asking veiled questions when they noticed Lucas's distant gaze, his automatic answers, and the smiles that seemed to be mere reflexes. His productivity dropped, and he knew he needed to find a way to reorganize his thoughts before his professional life began to fall apart as well. In a moment of introspection, he spoke to his boss and asked for a few days off to take care of personal matters. He received immediate support, which surprised him, but also made him realize that, in the midst of chaos, there were still people willing to lend a hand without demanding anything in return. Little by little, he began to move away from the apartment where he had lived with Helena, spending more time in the new house, even though it was still empty and cold. There, Lucas found a strange comfort. Even though each corner was a symbol of what he had lost, it was also a clean space to project who he wanted to be from that moment on. He began to take some personal objects to the new address, such as books he liked to reread, old photos of trips with friends, paintings he had bought at art fairs. As he organized the shelves and hung mementos that had nothing to do with her, he felt that, even slowly, he was rewriting his story. The house began to sound his favorite music, the kitchen once again smelled of fresh coffee in the morning, and the rooms began to seem less gloomy. Each change, no matter how small, represented a step towards a future that he did not yet know what it would be like, but that he needed to build. One night, while watching the clear sky from the balcony, Lucas received a message from Helena saying that she needed to see him to deliver some belongings and that she wanted to apologize in person once again. After thinking it over, he agreed to meet her, but made it clear that there was no room for discussion about reconciliation. They arranged to meet at a discreet café, far from the places they usually frequented. When they met, he noticed how much more fragile she seemed, but also how there was a strange serenity in her gaze, as if she had finally accepted that everything was over. She handed him a small bag with some of his personal belongings that she still had with her and, looking into his eyes, said that she regretted not only the betrayal, but also not having trusted the person who loved her the most. Lucas thanked her with a nod, but remained firm in his resolve not to reopen wounds. The meeting was brief and painful, but necessary to put an end, once and for all, to what insisted on remaining pending between them. In the following days, Lucas went back to the gym and picked up old hobbies he had abandoned, such as photography and hiking. Each small personal achievement was celebrated in silence, but for him, it was like recovering pieces of himself that he thought he had lost forever. Still, at times, sadness would appear unexpectedly, when he heard a song they used to sing together in the car, when he smelled a perfume similar to hers somewhere, or even when he saw couples laughing in restaurants. At these times, the moral dilemma that tormented him so much made itself present. Should he allow himself to try to love again, risking being betrayed once more, or should he protect himself forever, even if it meant living half a life? Little by little, he began to realize that the answer would not come from outside, but only from time and the way he chose to reframe his pain. The old apartment was emptied, and the keys were handed over to the owner. When he locked the door for the last time, he felt lighter, as if he was leaving behind not just a physical place, but the version of himself that still insisted on living in the past. In the new house, he began to invite friends over for lunch, had family over for visits, and little by little, filled each room with new memories that did not carry the weight of what he had experienced with Helena. The sunny days began to seem brighter, the nights less gloomy, and the dreams, previously interrupted by nightmares, began to return with more vivid colors. In the midst of all this, Lucas faced the paradox of simultaneously feeling grateful for having discovered the truth in time to start over and devastated by what he had lost. Every conversation with friends, every piece of advice he received, every silent reflection helped him rebuild himself, but not without scars. His greatest fear became allowing these scars to shape him into a bitter and distrustful man, incapable of seeing the beauty of true love. He knew he needed to find a balance between learning from what he had experienced and not becoming a prisoner of fear. And as he sat at the dinner table, now alone but surrounded by objects he had chosen, Lucas found himself smiling slightly, as if recognizing that, even after the greatest storm, it is possible to feel the gentle breeze of a new beginning approaching. Spring was approaching, and with it, Lucas began to feel that something inside him was also awakening, as if the cold that had dominated his heart in recent months was giving way to a timid but constant warmth. The new house, which had previously felt like a tomb for his hopes, was slowly transforming into a real home, lit by soft lights that he himself chose, decorated with plants that he cared for with dedication, and filled with small details that no longer represented a shared dream, but the desire to start over for himself. Every corner began to have meaning. The balcony became the place where he read his books at sunset, the kitchen became a space for experimenting with recipes that he learned from late-night videos, and the living room, which had once been a symbol of a future together, was now the setting for meetings with friends who made a point of reminding him that life could, indeed, be good again. One afternoon, while organizing documents on his desk, he received a call that left him silent for a few seconds after hanging up. It was his father-in-law, Renato, who asked to meet him in person. The idea of seeing again the man he respected so much, but who also carried the burden of being Helena's father, made him hesitate. However, something inside him told him that this conversation was necessary to finally tie up the loose ends that still insisted on hurting. They met at a discreet cafe in the city center, far from places that brought back memories of the past. When he arrived, he saw Renato sitting facing the door, with a serious expression but a welcoming look. As he approached, the two greeted each other with a firm handshake, followed by a silence that said more than any words. They sat facing each other, and the soft sound of cups and conversations around them seemed to exist in another universe. Renato began by saying that he could never express the pain he felt when he saw his daughter destroy something so beautiful, and that if he could trade places with her to prevent the pain she had caused, he would do so without thinking. Lucas, with a choked voice, replied that he understood, but that what hurt him most was realizing that, even after so many years of care and love, her fear spoke louder than everything they had built. His father-in-law lowered his head, running his hands through his gray hair, and confessed that he had always known about Helena's insecurities, but believed that their love would be enough to protect her from her own shadows. The weight of the conversation grew with each sentence, but it also brought a strange relief, as if, together, they were cleaning wounds that were too open to be ignored. As the conversation deepened, Renato told details of Helena's childhood, episodes that Lucas had never heard and that explained some of her behaviors, moments when, as a girl, she hid after her parents' fights, fears of being abandoned, emotional scars that never completely healed. As Lucas heard these stories, he felt the anger that still lingered in his chest dissipate, replaced by a compassionate sadness. The pain, previously concentrated in an almost unbearable resentment, gave way to a bitter understanding. No matter how much he had loved Helena, there were wounds in her that he could never heal. When the coffee cooled on the table and the two of them fell silent, Renato took Lucas's hand in his and, with tears in his eyes, said that he considered him part of the family, no matter what happened, and that if he ever needed him, he would not hesitate to reach out to him. After this encounter, Lucas walked through the streets lit by the sunset, feeling the weight of months of pain becoming lighter, as if he could finally breathe without each breath reminding him of betrayal. He returned home determined to move forward. The next day, he scheduled a visit from a real estate agent to advertise his old apartment, and when he entered the place for the last time, he did not cry. Instead, he walked through each room as if making peace with the past, silently thanking for the good times he had lived there, but also accepting that that part of his life was over. On weekends, Lucas began to accept invitations that he would have previously rejected without thinking: family lunches, happy hours with colleagues, short trips to nearby cities. It was during one of these get-togethers, during a music festival, that he met Isabella, a woman who, at first glance, seemed completely different from anyone he had ever met. She was spontaneous, had an easy laugh and a sincerity that, in a few minutes of conversation, left him disarmed in a way he had not known possible. They exchanged numbers, talked over the following days, and little by little, each message exchanged became a spark of hope that perhaps it was still possible to believe in new beginnings. Still, Lucas found himself constantly vigilant with himself, careful not to project old fears onto someone who had nothing to do with his past pains. One night, while talking to Isabella on a phone call that lasted for hours, he told her part of what he had experienced, but without delving into his most intimate pain. Isabella, in turn, listened in silence, offering words of understanding, but without judgment or morbid curiosity. The way she reacted, with gentleness and patience, moved him deeply, because he realized that, for the first time in a long time, he didn't need to measure every word to feel safe. In one of the conversations, Isabella said that she believed that emotional scars don't need to define who we are, but only remind us of how strong we were to get here. The phrase echoed in Lucas's mind for days, as if it were a seed planted in fertile soil, ready to germinate. Their meetings became more frequent, always in relaxed places, where they could talk without rushing, laugh without burdening, and share silences that didn't bother them. With each hug, Lucas felt the hardness of his heart soften a little more, although at times he found himself hesitating, as if the fear of suffering again was holding him back. On one of these occasions, during a picnic in the park, Isabella held his face between her hands and said, looking him in the eyes, that he didn't need to be afraid of being vulnerable with her, that she didn't promise that she would never make him suffer, because no one could promise that, but that she would guarantee honesty, and that if one day she didn't want to be there anymore, she would have the courage to say so, instead of destroying him with lies. Her words sounded like soft but powerful music, and Lucas, for the first time, not only heard her, but felt that he could believe her. In parallel, Helena also moved on with her life, but in a very different way. Between going to therapy sessions that her father-in-law convinced her to seek and trying to rebuild herself emotionally, she began to understand more clearly how much she had allowed insecurities to shape her attitudes. In long silences in her room, she reflected on the choices she had made, the paths she had taken and, mainly, on how she had hurt the ones she loved most by not having the courage to expose her weaknesses. She began to write letters to herself, trying to organize her thoughts, and in some of them she apologized repeatedly, as if she wanted, in some way, to erase the marks she had left on Lucas's heart. However, she understood that repentance, no matter how sincere, was not a bridge to reconciliation, but merely the first step in trying to live in peace with herself. Meanwhile, in his new home, Lucas began investing in himself like never before. He resumed photography classes he had always wanted to take, started running on nearby trails, and enrolled in a cooking class just for the fun of it, discovering that there were simple pleasures that could fill entire days without the need for another person. Each new skill he learned, each smile he exchanged with strangers, each goal he achieved helped him reconnect with who he had always been, someone who loved intensely, but who needed to love himself before loving anyone else. Little by little, the house began to have frames with his own photographs, the kitchen gained utensils that he had chosen by himself, and the sound of laughter with friends became more common than the heavy echo of painful memories. At one point, when he realized that Isabella was increasingly on his mind, Lucas invited her to visit his house. When she entered, she looked around with genuine admiration, complimenting the details he had chosen and commenting on how welcoming the place seemed. During the dinner he prepared, they both laughed about their clumsy attempts with the sauce and shared confidences about their fears and dreams. The naturalness with which their conversations flowed made him feel something new, not the desperate urgency of a love to fill voids, but the serene joy of sharing moments with someone who accepted him exactly as he was. That night, after she left, Lucas walked around the house in silence, reflecting on everything he had experienced since the night his world fell apart for him. Now, instead of just missing what he had lost, he felt gratitude for having learned so much about himself. Although there were still scars that burned on harder days, he knew that they had also made him more aware of who he was and what he deserved. And, as he lay in his bed, he looked at the ceiling and smiled, not as someone who had forgotten the past, but as someone who had finally managed to accept it as part of a story that, despite being tragic, had led him to a path where he could believe in love again, but this time, without forgetting to love himself first. At the end of that long journey of reconstruction, when the autumn leaves began to color the streets with shades of copper and gold, Lucas felt that life had finally found a new rhythm. He woke up every day with a serenity he had not experienced for a long time, tended to his plants in the morning, walked the trails he had discovered on his own and went to work with a light mind, free from the ghosts that haunted him. The nights, previously filled with suffocating thoughts, were now filled with meetings with friends, long readings, or long conversations with Isabella, who had become an increasingly constant presence in his life. Their relationship evolved naturally and respectfully, without rushing or demanding things, but with a companionship that grew with each moment they shared. One weekend, as they watched the sunset together on the porch of the house that had once been the scene of his worst days, Isabella held his hand and said in a soft voice that she didn't need grandiose promises, just that he be honest with himself and with her, and for the first time, he felt he could say, "I promise," without fear. While Lucas was getting back on his feet, Helena was also paving her own path, but in a completely different direction. After her last conversation with him, she immersed herself in a process of self-discovery that forced her to confront every mistake and insecurity that led her to the destruction of her own relationship. The therapy sessions, which were initially painful, gradually opened up space for her to see her weaknesses not as justifications, but as warnings of urgent changes that she needed to make. She moved to a small, simple but comfortable apartment, where she learned to live with loneliness and discover the value of being self-sufficient. The nights were long and silent, and each memory of Lucas came as a cruel reminder that the truest love she had received had not been enough to make her trust him. Some nights, she would sit on the floor of her bedroom, rereading letters she had written but never sent, letters in which she asked for forgiveness and confessed how much she loved him, but which would never find a recipient, because she understood that any attempt at getting closer would mean selfishness on her part. Renato, the father-in-law who had so often served as a link between the two, faced his own grieving process after seeing his daughter lose herself in her own insecurities and losing the son-in-law figure he considered like a son. He spent months trying to find the right words to comfort Helena, but little by little he understood that some pains could not be healed by the words of others. In his heart, He kept alive his gratitude for Lucas, remembering him as the man who had brought genuine joy to his daughter's life for so many years. During his occasional visits to her home, he insisted that she continue with therapy, reminding her that only real change could prevent her from repeating the same mistakes in the future. But even with all the support, Renato aged faster than he imagined, as if the silent suffering of seeing his family fall apart had stolen part of his vital energy, and he dedicated his days to trying to gather the strength to continue being present in Helena's life. Meanwhile, Lucas decided it was time to travel, not to escape the past, but to celebrate the present. He organized a trip to the coast, inviting Isabella to accompany him. They walked along deserted beaches, sat in simple bars by the sea, laughed until late looking at the stars, and in each conversation, they discovered affinities that went beyond attraction. They found complicity, respect, and the lightness that had been so lacking in their previous lives. On a special night, sitting in beach chairs, Lucas opened his heart and told his entire story, from beginning to end, without leaving anything out. When he finished, he waited out of fear or distrust, but Isabella simply held his hand firmly and said that his scars did not make him less worthy of love, but more human. And in that moment, he knew that he no longer needed to run away from himself. Time passed and Helena, even as she was rebuilding parts of herself, watched from afar the changes in Lucas's life. News about him reached her through social media or through mutual friends, photos of him smiling on trails, videos of him cooking new recipes, travel records. Each image was like a silent punch, but also a reminder that life went on, with or without her. It was during this process that Helena finally understood the depth of what she had lost and that no justification, no matter how convincing, could recover what she had destroyed. This acceptance did not come without pain, but it was what allowed her to begin to sincerely wish for Lucas to be happy, even if it was with someone else. One spring afternoon, Lucas and Isabella organized a lunch at their home, bringing together friends who had followed his journey from the darkest moments to that hopeful new beginning. The table was full of food, the laughter echoing, the welcoming atmosphere. All of this seemed to him to be living proof that life could reinvent itself with even more beautiful colors than before. At the end of the meeting, when Isabella hugged him from behind and whispered that she loved seeing him smile, Lucas felt that, for the first time in a long time, the past no longer had power over his present. He had not only survived what he considered the end of the world, but he had learned to build something new with the pieces that were left. On the other side of the city, Helena, in her silent living room, wrote the last letter she would ever send. In it, she said that she thanked Lucas for having loved her so deeply, that she wished him to be much happier than he ever was with her, and that, even far away, she would hope that he would find everything he had ever dreamed of. She put the letter in a box with objects from the past, closed it, and placed it on top of the closet, as if burying a chapter that needed to be left behind. Every morning, she tried to be a better version of herself, even knowing that she would never have a second chance with the person she had destroyed, and that the greatest lesson was to move forward without dragging chains. At the end of this story, all that remains is the memory that love, when true, can be one of the most beautiful and transformative forces in life, but that without dialogue and trust, even the purest love can be swallowed up by insecurity and pain. Lucas moved on, Helena learned from her mistakes, Renato found serenity when he saw his daughter trying to change, and Isabella became a symbol of hope that, even after great falls, it is possible to find someone willing to walk by your side without fear. And now, share in the comments what you thought of this story and your opinion about everything that happened. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this one. Always remember, betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, but also dreams, trust, and the very essence of those involved. Therefore, this channel does not support, encourage or romanticize any form of betrayal. Here, our stories are only to show how it can ruin lives, and how truth and respect are essential for any healthy relationship.